Welcome back to the reading of King Arthur and the Round Table. Today we are on chapter 10, The Coming of Galahad to Court. And if you remember from the previous chapter, we learned of the birth of Galahad and how Galahad came to be, that he is the son of Sir Lancelot and Elaine. Now remember, Sir Lancelot did not consciously marry Elaine. Elaine tricked him and used an enchantment on him, and therefore he did not really accept the fact that he had a child with her, of Galahad. So he did not raise Galahad. After all of this happened with Elaine, he went off to war with King Arthur. And now we're going to talk about what has happened in the years since he's been off to war. Okay, so the coming of Galahad to court. It was 20 years since the founding of the Round Table. All that time the Siege Perilous stood empty. Sir Lancelot sat on one side of it, and different knights at different times on the other. Now, unknown to anyone, the day and the night for whom it was made had come. On the vigil of Pentecost, the entire court and the knights of the Round Table were gathered at the great feast. As they assembled in the hall for dinner, a lady came riding fast on a lathered horse. A lathered horse is how we describe a horse who has been running for a long time and they get really sweaty and it almost looks foamy on them. That's being a lathered horse. She hurried into the hall and went straight to the king and asked for Sir Lancelot. She said she came from Pelleas, Lord of Carbonek, and must ask him to come with her into a forest. Sir Lancelot's dark eyes rested long on the lady's face. He remembered Elaine and the enchanted cup of wine. Was it another trick? "What do you want me to come for?" he asked. "You will know when we get there," she answered. It was not the kind of answer that a deceiving person would make up. "Well," he said slowly, "I will come with you." While he was getting ready, people ran to tell the queen that he was going to see Elaine again. But the queen was wiser now than in the days when wagging tongues could make her believe ill of Sir Lancelot. Now, when we say wagging tongues, this is a term used for people who like to gossip. If they gossip and they talk and they make up things and they talk about other people all the time, they're thought to be of wagging tongues. Okay. The love between them, meaning between the queen and Sir Lancelot, now was sure and safe from mischief. He came to take leave of her and promised to be back by dinner time the next day. Then he rode away with his squire and the lady. They rode fast through a forest and came to an abbey. A great company of nuns came to greet them and made Sir Lancelot welcome. He realized that some strange event must be about to happen. As soon as he was unarmed, because remember, to go into an abbey, they would have to take off their weaponry and their armor. As soon as he was unarmed, 12 nuns came in, and with them was a young lad of about 15. A lad is a boy. The most beautiful lad that Sir Lancelot had ever seen. In his eyes was a look of natural truth and affection, and he carried himself easily and simply. The nuns brought the youth to Sir Lancelot and said that he was Galahad. His father stood amazed, because remember, Sir Lancelot is his father. So his father stood amazed, but with a deep joy. He exchanged greetings with his son, while all the nuns wept. "Sir," they said, "we bring you this child whom we have cherished, and we pray you to make him a knight, for there is no more worthy man in the world from whom he could receive the order of knighthood." Okay, and remember that an abbey is a monastery where monks or nuns live, so this is an abbey of nuns. "Does he wish this himself?" asked Sir Lancelot. Galahad answered, "Yes." "Then he shall receive the order of knighthood on the high feast." So when midnight was past, the entire sisterhood gathered in the chapel, and at the first hour of Whitsunday, by the light of 100 candles, Sir Lancelot gave his son the order of knighthood. He had been tricked into marrying Elaine, and so broke his knightly vow to be true to the queen. Now he knew that he had moved on into a deeper state, where good came out of evil. As Galahad knelt at the altar step before him, Sir Lancelot felt nothing but love for him and for his birth and for the agonies of madness and loss that he himself had suffered because of it. It was the first of those states of love that Galahad was to bring about in the world. So let's pause here and talk about this, okay? You have to remember, 15 years has passed and he has never truly gotten to know his own son. He never really embraced the fact that he had a son. He knew of him, but he was tricked into being with Elaine, the mother of this child. And so he was going through deep agony, meaning pain and suffering from the heartbreak that he had caused because he broke his vow. And that vow of knighthood that he had given to the queen was his defining characteristic. It is what he measured his life on. And when he lost that honor, when he broke that with Elaine, he kind of went crazy in his mind. So he never really embraced being a father. Instead, he went off to war. And when a man went off to war in those times, they would be gone for years at a time. It's not like in present day when, like my husband, okay? My husband went to war, but he would go to war for 1 year at a time, okay, when he was in the army. But back in medieval times, if they went off to war, it could be many years before you would see that person again. And that is what has happened. So he's been gone for many years, and he's come back, and he's been taken to meet his son, who's now 15 or so. So he's about 15 years old, a teenage boy, and he's never really truly gotten to know. And he's shocked and amazed by the fact that he is such a good person. He's been raised by these nuns, but he's a really good person. And now Sir Lancelot feels a sense of pride and love, a love that he's never really felt before because he never really got to know him before this point. So he's feeling very proud of his son, that he's turned into such a fine young man. Okay, so let's continue reading. That morning, Sir Lancelot kept his promise to the queen and returned to Camelot for the feast. As the knights took their seats at the round table, there was a stir of excitement, for new golden letters shone around the Siege Perilous. Now remember, this is the seat at the head of the table. They read, "This siege is to be fulfilled," which really there's not a head of the table because it's a round table, but it has always been a seat that's never been filled at the table. Everyone at the round table knows about the Siege Perilous. And remember that if anyone tried to sit in it that wasn't the rightful person to be seated there, they would die from it. So now he's come into court, and there's golden letters shining because it's got magical powers in the Siege Perilous. And his seat has read, "This siege is to be fulfilled." Now a staggering thought struck Sir Lancelot. Could it be that his son Galahad was the mysterious figure for whom the Siege Perilous had been waiting all these years? Well, he would wait and see. "I suggest," he said to the others, "that this writing should be covered up until the man comes who will fulfill all this." So they threw a silk cloth over the seat and hid the writing. Then the king gave word for dinner. But just as he was going to seat himself, a squire came running in, knelt before him, and said, "Sire, down there by the river there is a great stone floating on the water, and I saw a sword sticking up out of it. A stone and a sword. King Arthur remembered the sword and the stone that 20 years ago had given him his throne. I will see this marvel, he said, and went down the castle walks to the river bank. Everyone in the hall followed in a long procession. On the water floated a block of red marble. Now, I want you to remember this word marble because we're learning rocks. Okay, we're learning about rocks in science. And I want you to think about marble. It's a very, very heavy rock. Okay, so on the water floated, do we think a marble rock would float? This would be very mysterious indeed. So on the water floated a block of red marble, and out of it rose a fine sword. In its jeweled hilt, so the handle, was carved, "Only he by whose side I ought to hang shall take me, and he shall be the best knight of the world." The king turned to his friend Sir Lancelot, clapped him on the shoulder, and said that surely that sword was his. Now Sir Lancelot smiled, but answered gently, "Sire, it is not my sword. I am not going to put my hand on it, for I know it is not for me. I am sure that some great thing will begin today." Because Sir Lancelot knows inside, he knows in his heart that it is his son that truly is the greatest knight in the world, but no one else really knows that yet. The king looked around, doubtful whom to call on to attempt the sword. Well, perhaps Gawain, his nephew, who was always trying to rival Sir Lancelot. Maybe he would have a chance now. "Nephew," said the king, "will you try?" Sir Gawain looked at Sir Lancelot and at the sword and at all the watching faces. He was afraid to fail. "Sire," he replied, "excuse me, I would rather not." King Arthur knew he wanted to be urged. "Sire, for my sake and at my command, try to take the sword." "Sire, at your command I will obey," answered Gawain. He stepped onto the bank, a splendid figure in purple and gold, his red hair shining, his face white with excitement. He grasped the sword, but it held fast, meaning it was still stuck. Stiff with humiliation, so he's feeling really embarrassed. Sir Gawain stepped back. The king knew that someone else must fail to save his nephew's pride, so he called on Sir Percival, who set little store on pride. He tried and failed and stepped back smiling. Then the king decided to leave the sword for the moment and to go back to the feast. Can you believe that? His curiosity didn't get the best of him. He was just hungry, so he went back to the feast. Now they all took their places once more in the hall, and dinner proceeded. Suddenly, with a clap like thunder, all the windows and doors closed. Yet the light did not dim at all. There was dead silence, and every heart was afraid. The voice of the king spoke cheerily. "Ah, fair fellows and lords, we have seen marvels today, but before night we shall see greater ones." And as he spoke, in came an old man dressed in white, unknown to anyone in the hall. He led with him a young knight in red armor, with only an empty scabbard by his side. Sir Lancelot's heart was moved. He had seen the young knight at midnight. No one else knew him or had ever seen him before. The old man led him to the king and said, "Sire, I bring you here a young knight by whom the marvels of this court shall be accomplished." Very mysterious. "Sire," said the king, standing up. "Sir," said the king, standing up. "You are right welcome, and the young knight with you." The old man helped the knight to take off his armor. Under it, he wore a tunic of scarlet linen. That was kind of like underclothes, if you will. A tunic was like one piece that would go down and it kind of protected their skin from the armor. And the old man hung on his shoulders a cloak that was edged with white fur. So if you look in this picture, so this is a cloak, okay? It's kind of hidden or hiding him behind this, and it has white fur on it. Then he said to the young man, "Sir, follow me." He led him to the round table, to the Siege Perilous. Everyone saw Sir Lancelot in the next seat exchange a greeting with the stranger. The old man lifted up the silk cloth, and the writing on the chair had changed to say, "This is the siege of Sir Galahad." "Sir," said the old man, "that place is yours." In dead silence, the young knight sat down. Sir Lancelot drew a sharp breath. Nothing happened, because remember, if it wasn't the right person, that person would die. But nothing has happened to Galahad. The lad sat easily, looking around him quite naturally at the faces of famous knights. Then he turned and said goodbye to the old man, who left the hall. Everyone began to talk again, and dinner went on. But now the news was buzzing around that the name of the new knight was Galahad, so he must be Sir Lancelot's son. The old story of Sir Lancelot and the tricked marriage with Elaine was told again. People slipped out of the hall and ran to the Queen's apartments with the news, swearing the newcomer was exactly like Sir Lancelot. The Queen answered, "I should like to see him. He must be a noble man, for so is his father." After dinner, the king took Sir Galahad down to the river to see the sword in the marble rock. The queen saw the company going out, and she gathered her ladies and went too. The king told Sir Galahad what an extraordinary object it was, and how several famous knights had failed to draw the sword. Sir Galahad looked surprised. "Sire, it is not extraordinary," he answered politely, "because the adventure is not theirs, but mine. I knew this sword would be here, so I did not bring one. But here is the scabbard." Now it was indeed the scabbard that Merlin had left on the island, that could be reached only by a bridge that was only 6 inches wide, guys. That's about the width of my head, okay? A bridge only that wide. That's not very big. No one knew how Galahad had won it, and he said no more about it, because he's a humble man. He doesn't boast and brag. Galahad took hold of the hilt and drew the sword out easily, as the young lad Arthur had done 20 years ago in a London churchyard. He slid it into the scabbard and said, smiling, "It is better there than in the stone." Then he took it out again and looked at it up and down admiringly. "It is the sword of Sir Balin the Savage, the great fighter," he said proudly. "With it he killed his brother Sir Balin by mistake." He went on to tell the king this story, and the king smiled at Sir Lancelot, for they had known of the event Sir Galahad spoke of before he was ever even born. But the adventures of the day were not yet over. And then we will read how the quest began. Okay, thanks for listening.